I want to talk to you today about housing first policy, what it is, and why it works. First, we need to start with what we do now. So in the United States, we practice something called the staircase approach to homelessness, or the Continuum of Care approach to homelessness, which is basically like the West's standard approach to homelessness in the United States and in Europe. So essentially, as an unhoused person, you are expected to start at the bottom of the staircase and climb your way up the staircase from being street homeless. So you're expected to be at the shelter, and then to, while in the shelter and dealing with the abuses that I have thoroughly documented for you and intend to publish more of in the months to come, you're expected to deal with all the riffraff that goes on inside of the shelters, and then somehow manage to get a job interview, and then while you are in the shelter, to save up enough for an apartment, and then to get an apartment, and then to become a functional member of society. So essentially, you're expected to get a job and to labor while being actively unhoused. So I think that approach doesn't work, and I'm not the only person who thinks that approach doesn't work. You need only look to Finland, a country in Europe, who also practiced the Continuum of Care approach to homelessness, or the staircase approach to homelessness, up until the year 2007. They practice this approach because it is the West's standard approach to homelessness. And it comes from a place of, I think, stigma and misunderstanding of who is homeless, why they are homeless, what it means to be homeless or to be unhoused. And it is not a care-centered approach. It is more like a shame-centered approach. And you put the burden on people who are already money-stressed, food-stressed, and housing insecure or homeless. So essentially, the Finnish government practiced the Continuum of Care approach just like we did until the year 2007, because they realized that they were at a stalemate. Things were not getting better with the homelessness crisis. There were still street homeless people. And you also have to consider the fact that Finland is a northern European country. So when it becomes winter in that country, it becomes very deeply cold. And if you are on the street while homeless, you could freeze to death. So they decided to accept a more care-centered approach to the houselessness crisis. And they started to implement housing first policy, which is exactly what it sounds like. Housing first policy is really just addressing the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is housing. At the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is food, water, and shelter. So without food, water, and shelter, you can't be a contributing member of society. You can't get a fulfilling employment. You can't get gainful employment. You can't contribute what it is your purpose in life is to be, because you are actively struggling with your housing. So in lieu of an ineffective approach to homelessness, which was the staircase approach, they decided to employ the housing first policy. Essentially, this looked like the Finnish government making it law that the city governances across the country had to rebalance the city budgets and take money away from the police and put it towards incentivizing landlords to expand public and subsidized social housing. So by taking money away from the police and putting it towards housing, they were able to make sure that there were enough housing units for every citizen in the country. And thus, they were able to streamline the process of getting housing so that you were able to get an apartment in as little effort as just filling out a form. So you're able to fill out one form. And I think this is really important to talk about because, in my experiences with houselessness in New York City, it is constant paperwork, piles and piles of paperwork. If you've been following me on TikTok or Instagram for long enough, you know that I am actively experiencing retaliatory transfers by the Department of Homeless Services. And one thing you may not know is that every single time you are transferred, you have to start the process over again with a new case manager and new mountains of paperwork. And that's really how they get you. They are burying us under mountains and mountains of paperwork. It's bureaucracy that costs people their lives. It costs people precious time, while these for-profit entities are gleaning a profit off of our crisis. So by taking away the bureaucracy and streamlining the process so that all you have to do is fill out one form, you essentially can so essentially the Finnish government streamlined the process so that all their citizens had to do is let their government know that they want an apartment and fill out one form, and they're able to get an apartment without a long wait. And when I say long, the alternative is to continue the process that we have now in place, for example, in New York City and across the country. In New York City, the people I have interviewed have spent years in the shelter system. So the soonest I have heard someone getting housed is a year in the shelter system, but the average that I hear is 2 years in the shelter system. I've heard people who have been in the shelter system for 8 years, which is unacceptable. I mean, we really need to destigmatize the experience of houselessness and to humanize the experience of houselessness. It is inevitable and inevitability for most people who are essentially experiencing wage slavery in this country. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's work yourself to the bone, work yourself to death when you're owed reparations, mind you, work yourself to the bone, or become homeless. And, most people don't want to experience that because of all the stigma and the shame and the disruption to your life that can come with that. But to destigmatize it, to humanize it, I think is the first step to a more care-centered approach to solving the houselessness crisis. And most people in this country are just one paycheck away from experiencing houselessness themselves or becoming unhoused themselves. We obviously have been crying out for several years that the New York Police Department doesn't need billions and billions and billions of dollars in budgeting, you know what I'm saying, to brutalize the citizens, to brutalize unhoused New Yorkers. We need a system that prioritizes getting people in housing first. And honestly, as critical as I am of the system, the Department of Homeless Services in New York City, we have the closest program to Housing First in the country. So we have to understand that we are very close to achieving that goal. And it is really about changing our perception and a philosophical shift as to how we feel about unhoused people, about the process of homelessness, the process of solving homelessness that we currently employ, acknowledging that it doesn't work and acknowledging that a solution is there. But we first have to decide as a collective that we have no vested interest in continuing a system that robs people of the opportunity to be housed and stable contributing members of society, which is what housing does. You know what I'm saying? I had a conversation with my new caseworker, and we were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know what I'm saying? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is something that like every social worker is familiar with. It's a little pyramid, and at the bottom of the triangle, it talks about food, water, shelter. The next level is like belonging and community. At the very top of it is self-actualization. And I let her know that actually Maslow misinterpreted this whole philosophy because he lifted it from the Blackfoot indigenous people, which he was embedded amongst and learning from. So they don't even put self-actualization at the top of the pyramid. They put community actualization at the top of the pyramid. You achieve self-actualization so you can actualize your entire community. And the purpose of that is to perpetuate your culture. And I think it's very interesting when you look at the statistics of the Department of Homeless Services to realize that since 2020, their primary clientele, their so-called clientele, has been Black women and Black families as their main source of profit. You know what I'm saying? So while turning us through this money-making, body-turning, hope-crushing system, you are robbing them of the opportunity to actualize themselves, to actualize their community, and to perpetuate their culture, which is to say Black culture. And that is simply by the choice and the decision, the bureaucratic decision, to make sure that they are robbed of housing for as long as possible. We had a little laugh about that because, of course, he misinterpreted it. He's a European man, and I feel like the reason he misinterpreted it is because of his own culture. A European worldview is very much an individualistic worldview. So, of course, he put self-actualization at the top because they've always been more vested in individualism than community care, the community-oriented worldviews. So I really feel like we have to acknowledge that it is Indigenous people's and Black people's more natural worldview to put emphasis and onus on making sure that we are okay on a community level, which of course comes with housing. We can't do that without housing. So I won't go on and on forever. I just want to take some time to talk about this today because it's really important to me. Today is my 29th birthday, and it's the beginning of Taurus season, so I want to come in heavy and steady on what I really care about. What I really want for my 29th birthday is housing first policy in New York City. I want to see my people in a steady housing without having to struggle and to rot and linger in the shelter system for no reason for way too long. So If you would like to learn more about the history of housing discrimination in this country, I really encourage you to check out the California Reparations Task Force report, Chapter 5, Housing Discrimination, because the reality that we see being played out in the New York City Department of Homeless Services system is a continuation of almost 200 years of policy, inventive and very creative policy to rob specifically African American people of access to fair and equal housing under the law in this country.